My name's Tavis, and to tell you a little bit about myself and my upbringing, I grew up in the greater Seattle area. I grew up in Everett, just a little bit north of here. Growing up, it was me and my mom and my brother. My dad left our family when I was a couple years old, so growing up, it was just the three of us. Aside from a large network of extended family, lots of aunts, uncles, cousins, it was very much like a community, raising all of the cousins together. My mom, when I was in kindergarten or so, unfortunately had to take a medical retirement from her job at Boeing and was not able to work anymore for the remainder of my childhood. And so we grew up on government assistance in a low-income neighborhood, low-income housing, and kind of often had difficulty making ends meet. And I think that definitely shaped, I think, who I am today and kind of the values and things that I learned as growing up in terms of work ethic and taking on responsibility at a young age, even getting a job at a young age to kind of help with family needs. In terms of kind of my spiritual background, I think most of my family, most of my aunts, uncles, cousins would identify as Christian, but we didn't really live that. Jesus wasn't in control of our decisions. We didn't spend time with the Lord. We didn't attend church. I think but most people in my family would probably identify as Christian. So I didn't really develop a personal relationship with Jesus until the end of high school, when a friend invited me to church. And I was kind of at that time grappling with kind of the discord in my mind of the things that I said I believed, compared to how I was actually living and what my life looked like. And so kind of in that setting, a friend invited me to church, and that was really when I developed a personal relationship with Jesus, learned that you could have a personal relationship with Jesus, and that really changed my life. So I've been going to church since then. I've been here at Mosaic for about 6 years now. And yeah, I think kind of echoing what other people said, the community at Mosaic is really what brought me in and has even deepened and made my relationship with Jesus so much richer. In terms of a couple other things about me and kind of things that have shaped who I am today, definitely my upbringing, and the things kind of family and income and kind of all of the emotions and the difficulties and the things around that kind of shaping my personality. I'd say definitely my relationship with Jesus. That completely changed my life in every aspect. And then the other thing that I would say has had a pretty big impact on my life is I went to the University of Washington here in Seattle, and then I moved down to Los Angeles and went to medical school in Los Angeles. And I would say kind of education and my professional development has had a pretty big impact on my life. I work at Seattle Children's Hospital as a pediatric emergency medicine physician, and kind of the overlay of what it means to be Black in academics, Black in medicine, and kind of the way that those thoughts and experiences have shaped me as well. What it means to have privilege in that respect with regard to kind of like professional development, socioeconomic status, and those changes over the course of my life, I think, have been really powerful in shaping who I am today. So that's a little bit about me.
Hey, I'm Patrick, and been coming to Mosaic for about 2.5 years with my wife, and we have a 2-year-old son, Hudson. and he's awesome. He's named after Hudson Taylor, because I'm named after a famous missionary, St. Patrick. So yeah, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Southern California as well, most of my life, and I guess one of the most impactful moments in my life was when I was in kindergarten, and there was this other kid that came to me at the schoolyard, and he was like, "Hey, what are you?" And I was like, "I don't know, I'm a human being." And he's like, no, seriously, what are you?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Are you Chinese?" And I was like, "I don't know what that is, but sure, yeah, I'm Chinese." And I know, and so I went home that night to my mom, and I'm like, "Hey, Mom, are we Chinese?" And she's like, "No, you're Korean." I was like, "Okay, all right, I got this." So then I went back to that kid, and I was like, "Hey, guess what? I'm Korean." And he's like, "Okay." He comes back the next day. He's like, "Are you North or South?" I was like, "I don't know." I don't know. I really don't know. And then I went home, and I was like, "Hey, Mom, are we North or South?" She's like, "You're South Korean." I was like, "Okay." So then I went back, but it was really impactful because I had no concept of ethnicity. My school was predominantly a mixture of all these different ethnic groups, and I didn't know I was different. Up until that point, I didn't know that there was this whole other identity that I had. I just thought oh, okay, we're all the same. And yeah, that was a pretty big shocking moment for me. And I guess, the other shocking moment came that really impacted my life was when after we got married. Obviously, that was a pretty big moment. But then right after we got married, 2.5 weeks later, we went to DC for my job. And all my life having grown up in Southern California, I thought everywhere was like Southern California. I didn't know, I took trips to New York, and I was like, similar, right? And then, but then actually having a professional career in the East Coast was something totally different, of the work ethic, the culture. Just that was really a big shock for me. Even seasons, I didn't know that. I didn't know the concept of a coat check until I moved to the East Coast. So that was pretty impactful. I came to know the Lord. I grew up in a Christian home, but it was just Sunday school Christian. But then I, kind of back and forth. But then, there was this in junior high. There was this Bible study teacher, and he just had quiet time with me every day. He'd pick me up. We'd go study the Word of God, and he'd answer all of my questions. And then, that I think really helped shape my perspective of what it means to follow Christ. That's just a little bit about myself.
Hi, my name is Tiffany, and I've been going to Mosaic for over 7 years. I moved here from Michigan right after college, and I decided to move here through the volunteer corps, so served full-time at a nonprofit. And during my time at that nonprofit, taught about social and economic injustice with high school kids, which was a really powerful experience for me, and getting the opportunity to walk alongside them and have them share their stories with each other, and to see these kids open their eyes to, oh my gosh, we both grew up in Seattle, but our experiences were so different, and why is that? And you're my friend, and so why is that happening to you? And I think that is just so powerful, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later today. But I grew up in a family. My mom is from Mexico City, and my dad grew up in the U.S. And so my mom moved to the United States when she married my dad. And when she did, she was actually a practicing neurologist in Mexico when she moved here. When she moved to the U.S., they informed her that her degree wasn't valid in the United States, and so she wasn't able to work. And that was true for the most of my growing up. And so I had a mother who was a doctor and had been practicing for years that was now a stay-at-home mom. And so she was really motivated and used to working a lot, and so she was really committed to our experience as kids. And I think about back back on it now, and she was a person that brought in community so naturally, because that's what Mexicans, that's what we do, and we have a huge family, and we didn't have that in Michigan. So we would literally like be at the grocery store, and she heard a woman speaking Spanish, and she'd be like, "Hi, I'm Alicia. Nice to meet you. Can we be friends?" And so then she would bring her kids over, and then we'd be hanging out. So now we had like a group of like 40 people. It was like all these Latina moms and their kids that spoke English and Spanish just like we did. And even though we grew up in the U.S., my mom was very adamant, like, my kids will know they're Mexican, they will speak Spanish, they will be able to speak with their family, they will understand their culture. Because realistically, my mom came to the United States because of love, not because she wanted to live here. And so I think a really significant story in my life that I always go back to. So when my mom was pregnant with me, she went to the doctor and they said, "I don't know, ma'am, like, this pregnancy seems pretty risky. We really think that you should just, like, it's too risky for you." And she was like, "You're an idiot. I'm getting out of here. I know my daughter's fine and you're stupid." And she left. And she still tells the story like he didn't know what he was talking about. But I remember learning about that as a kid and was like, "Wait, what? Mom, that's like a pretty big deal." And she's like, "No, he was stupid." And like, that's who she is though. Like, she had faith the whole time, like that mother instinct of like, my daughter is going to be okay. And I was premature and had things, but now I'm pretty much fine. And like, to see that story is really significant. And especially to now looking back, like, that's how she encountered living in the United States, living in a fairly white community, living in like a suburb of Michigan after living in Mexico City, one of the like most thriving cities in the country. She learned to make the best of it. And also she like taught us to fight for what we believed in. And so it just was never a question. And looking back, there were so many times as a kid that I had to justify the fact that my mom was here, justify that it's okay that my mom immigrated because she's a doctor and she's contributing and she's smart. And also like people just saying things like, "I don't really understand your mom when she talks." But like, she covered that from us so much. Like, all the time she got pulled over randomly and had to deal with so much stuff with cops. Like, my parents never like shared that with us. They like protected us. They wanted us to feel safe and know that we had the rights to everything. Education was the most important thing. And so she laid her life down so that her kids could have education. And so that's what I grew up in. Like, we are Mexican. Being Mexican is great. We love it. And also we will always prioritize our education. So I went to college at a private school, got a full ride, and went there. And little did I know why I got a full ride, but I just thought it was Jesus. He was providing. But I went there and I realized I was one of 5 Mexican kids at the school. And it was my first time in my life that I realized that was a thing. Like, because I just had been surrounded by Mexican families, people that spoke English and Spanish. It was very normalized in my household. And then all of a sudden now it was like this thing to me monetized. Like, freshman year of college, I had probably 15 people random come to my dorm room and be like, "Hi, I have to interview a native speaker for my Spanish project, and I heard that you could help me," because there was 5 of us, and so who else were they going to interview? And so I had this decision, because my dad's from the US, I speak really good English, I can pass for pretty much anything. People get confused all the time. And so I had this decision, like, I can identify with being American and like live this life, or I can like really embrace where I'm from and my roots. And I think that was like my mom's commitment when she moved here, was like, I'll move here because it's a better future for my kids, but they will know where they came from. And so that was like my choice in that moment, to say like, I am Mexican, and that's such a big part of my identity. And Trini, I love what you said about that, because like, had I made the other decision, I would have lost such a big part of me, and like why I was raised certain ways and why things are important for our people and our community. And through that time, started to volunteer at a Latino community center, specifically with high school students. And that's when I really started to see the ways that even like so young in our education system, they're being told, hey, you're a girl, so you should like just get pregnant and have babies. Hey, you're Latino, you shouldn't like take that hard math class. You probably wouldn't be able to handle it. And you're not gonna go to college anyway, so don't worry about it. And they were hearing all those messages somewhat like directly, and they would come to me and say, hey, Tiffany, I really want to take AP Calc, but my counselor told me I probably shouldn't. Like, why is that? And we would like talk. And now like most of those kids like graduated from college and are doing great things, but like that's what they were up against. And I think about back to my mom, like I never heard about any of that stuff, but now I ask questions and I realize how much she was up against that, even as someone that had the privilege of an education. And still to this day, I find myself validating, like, yes, my mom is an immigrant, but she's a doctor and she's doing all these things and she helps people and she does a lot of work pro bono. I've never once justified my dad living here ever. And I think that's like a realization I've just had recently. So I guess the last thing that I'll say, like, how I came to Jesus. So I grew up in a family. My dad was a pastor's kid. My mom was culturally Catholic. And so you just talk about God a lot, but we didn't read the Bible. That wasn't a thing, especially in the Catholicism my mom grew up in. Like the priest teaches the word and you just sit there. And so I remember the first time I came home with the Bible, my mom said, "Oh, are you going to become a nun? Like that's your path then." I was like, no, like I want to learn and read. And so I learned to like start pursuing God in my own relationship on my own, probably in high school, mostly because I was lonely and I didn't know what else to do. And because my grandpa was a pastor, he saw that and started speaking with me more. And that's when I decided to go to a Christian college, which was also formative. So like while I was also forming this identity in Jesus, I was forming this identity in being Mexican and how both of those things are going to be such a big part of who I became.
My name is Amy. I was born in Los Angeles, but I have grown up in Washington. Washington is like the only thing I really know. My parents actually didn't know anybody in Washington when we moved. We moved because my parents felt called to start a church here for University of Washington students, other college students. So they came, go dogs, they came with a few other families and started a church, and that's how we got here. My family is Korean. My dad was born in Kentucky. My mom was born in Korea. We are both North and South, in case. I also got that question in elementary school, and I didn't know what they were talking about. So until I went to college, I was part of this very Asian American church, predominantly Korean, with so much of like our Asian heritage like embedded into church. And my family's doing church things like every day of the week. My parents led like international student ministry, all of these things. That was my life. And growing up in a Christian home, my parents like put all the values out there for us, but I like met the Lord for myself in high school. And then a week before I started college, my parents sat us down and they said that we are leaving this church and we don't know what's going to happen next. And this church was my family, like the kids whose parents also moved to Seattle to start this church, like they were my brothers and sisters and their parents were my parents. So it was very traumatic, I think, for my entire family. I started coming to Mosaic when I was a sophomore. And I think that was the time, like, slowly coming to Mosaic, I was, like, so horrified and distressed by what had happened with my previous church, that I was very, like, uneasy starting coming to Mosaic, and I, like, didn't want to be in a small group. I was just, like, I'm so lost. I mean, I never blamed God, but I was so confused. But God really started to, like, meet me. I started to learn like what identity in Christ like really means and like how he cares for me and how like he was with me in all of the brokenness and he like has good things for my life and my family's life and that's when I really was like, okay, I'm walking with the Lord now. Like, Jesus, you are leading my decisions. Like, I am nothing without you. I'm so lost without you. I think some things that were important. So I guess my immigration story, like my grandparents, my dad's parents came to the U.S. as young people, which I feel like is a little less common, like to study at university. And my mom's parents moved to America when she was about 4. And the only reason they were able to do so is because my grandpa was a chemist. And that was back when you could only come to America from a different country if you had like a skill that you could offer. So I really think about that a lot more as I get older. It's like there would be no Dong family had my grandparents not been able to move, and that's a pretty heavy thing. And then the second thing is that when I was 19, I moved in. My mom's parents, my grandpa had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and my grandma had pretty severe diabetes. And I was a college student at the University of Washington. And I decided to start taking care of them. So when I was in college, I was like, with the young people by day and with the elderly by night. And so that's where I like really got connected back to my Korean heritage, like really, like my grandparents have always been near us, but like to be caring for my grandparents, I feel like that experience has completely changed my life because it was really hard. And seeing someone you love get sick, like even more sick and like not get better, and then eventually my grandpa passed away. I feel like that entire experience has completely changed the way I think about my life and about like every day and about God. And it really broke me in so many ways, like that I'm not sure I can even like articulate. But also it's like brought me closer to my family, and it's just taught me a lot about like what's important in life and how life is so short. And yeah, I would just want to be chugging along with Jesus. I've been coming to Mosaic, so 5-ish years, and Mosaic is my home, so I'm really glad to be here.
How you guys doing? I think I know most of you, but for those who don't know me, my name is Ariel Rivera. I go by Tito. So I come from a Puerto Rican background. Both my parents are Puerto Rican. I was born in South Bronx, New York. But I call Florida home. I'm a Florida Rican. But I didn't grow up in like Miami, Florida. I grew up in Northwest Florida, which is pretty much lower Alabama. Growing up, I grew up in a Christian home. My father is now a pastor. He wasn't always a pastor growing up, but when I was in middle school, my father became a pastor of our local Spanish church. But I come from a history of pastor. My father was a street preacher in the Bronx. Then we moved to Florida. We found a small local Pentecostal church. I grew up Pentecostal. Really strict Pentecostal, where women couldn't wear pants, dresses, no makeup, and which really sucked more for my sisters than me. But yeah, so eventually our pastor left. I was young, I don't remember why. So my father stepped up to be the pastor until we found another pastor, and then my father's been preaching ever since. So that's the environment I grew up on. So I wouldn't say I've been a Christian my whole life, but like many of you who have, I stepped away as a teenager and wanted to do my own thing. And around that time, I guess one of the biggest impacts I had as a teenager is when I became a father. I have a son, he's 20 years old now. And that impacted my life a lot, trying to be a teenage parent and growing up fast. But it's many blessings come with that as well, and and having to grow up and mature at an early age. Things didn't work out with my son and his mother, so I eventually joined the military. In 2005, I left home, I joined the military, and then about a year later, I was in Iraq, and that's probably my biggest impact. And I spent 15 months in Iraq. And in 2005, Iraq was still very fresh, a lot going on down there. And there's a couple of times where I honestly did not think I was coming home. I just praying with my parents. I knew I had a church back home that was always praying for me. And thankfully, I made it home just fine. But I remember being at church. Or I'll back up a little bit. I remember, when I first joined the Army, I didn't go to college, but being a young soldier in the barracks, you have all the college experience without the college. so so when I was in Iraq and I was experiencing all that, I knew, if I came home, like, I needed to change. Like, the way I was living was not how I was brought up, and I knew was not what God had planned for me. So I remember hearing the story about a guy who he would pray with his little boys and pray for their wives, even though they didn't, they were kids, didn't never had a girlfriend, but he would sit with them and pray for their wives, for their future wives, So I was like, man, that's not a bad idea. So I remember at night I would just pray for my wife. I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't know my wife at the time, but I knew when I came home, like, I needed to change, and I would ask God to help me meet my wife and walk in the route that He had planned for me. So later, I came home in September of 2008, and I met my wife in December. When I came home, I was in North Carolina. I came home for Christmas. While I was home for Christmas, I met my wife, who was also grew up in a Pentecostal background. But my wife's from Venezuela. She had only been in the States a few years when I met her. But I met my wife in December, and literally in April we were married, and we're going on 12 years now. And yeah, I mean, she's been a big blessing, in my life, and so I got married, and she comes from a Christian background, like I said, a Pentecostal background as well. Her father was a pastor in our hometown as well. And then about 2 years later, being in the military, we had to move. And this is my wife's first time being away from her family, so it was hard on all of us. But we've actually gotten pretty used to moving all the time now. And every time we move, we always, the first thing we do is find a church, no matter where we go. When we're looking for a place to live, she's looking for apartments, I'm looking for churches. Or I'll be looking for apartments, she'll be looking for churches. And we moved to Seattle almost 2 years ago. And we got here in September, and we live near Green Lake. And walking to the PCC one day, we came across Mosaic when you were at the old building. And there was a couple of people out there with a little tent handing out flyers. And I'm like, is that a church? So we were walking to the PCC, took the pamphlet, came home, read it, and came the following Sunday, and we've been here ever since.